Oh, now I remember. So The Matrix Revolutions tells the story of Zion's freedom fighters making a final stand against the machines. What is up, guys, and welcome back to my Matrix review series. With The Matrix Resurrection coming out tomorrow, we are now on the finale of the original trilogy, which is The Matrix Revolutions. If you want to check out my previous two reviews from last week, those are going to be on a playlist, but you can also just search them. I did full reviews of the first movie and the second film for the first time on this channel, and now we are here. Now, to give a little bit of context, I absolutely love the original Matrix. I was 9 years old when it came out. I remember all of the influences that movie had on Hollywood, on action, on sci-fi. It was just a landmark movie, and I still think that it holds up very well. Never been a huge fan of Reloaded, but it does have some standout action sequences and some interesting ideas. Now, The Revolutions is one that I was curious to rewatch because, much like with Reloaded, I had a little statement in that review where I said that I kind of Phantom Menaced myself whenever I watched that film, and I think a lot of us did, to where the hype level was so huge for The Matrix Reloaded, and we all wanted it to be just the most epic thing ever, that we walked into it, and even though the vast majority of us didn't really care for it, or at least was disappointed in it compared to the level of awesomeness in The Matrix, everybody walked out of that movie for the first time and still thought that it was awesome because it was supposed to be awesome, right? It must be me. Maybe on rewatch it'll be awesome the way that it should be. And we kind of had that same thing with The Phantom Menace. Now with this movie, I had the exact same experience. This was only like, what, 8 months later? It wasn't even a full year after Reloaded came out that Revolutions hit the theaters. And I remember when I first saw it, I thought, oh, this is even better than Reloaded. There's so much action, and they get all the answers, and everything closes out nicely. And I've only rewatched this movie once since, and I've never had the desire to go back to it. So this is the one that I was curious that since so many people seem to make this out to be much worse than Reloaded, what is my thoughts going to be after so long? Because I have not watched this movie in well over a decade. And unfortunately, on rewatch, I quickly remembered all of the things about this movie that I hate and convinced myself that was cool the first time that I saw it. And by the end of my latest rewatch, it's no question whatsoever why me, along with a lot of other people, just completely stopped giving a fuck about this franchise and never really cared to see any more sequels in this universe. And we're just gonna pretend that there are no sequels and just go back and watch the original. Even to the point where The Matrix Resurrection, which I'm less than 24 hours away from seeing, I still don't really have a whole lot of excitement for it. I haven't watched or read any reviews. I don't even know what the early buzz is on this film, but I just don't really care because they just tarnished everything that I loved about the original Matrix with these two sequels, mostly this one, and I can't get my hype level high. I can't get my excitement level high. I hope that I walk out tomorrow and say, shit, that was awesome, we're back on track, but I just don't care, and it's because of this movie.
Mr. Anderson, welcome back. We missed you.
It ends tonight.
So starting off with the positives for The Matrix Revolutions, the only thing that I can really say is that for just face value entertainment, there's a couple of visual sequences that are interesting enough to watch, like the war in Zion, where you have all those little machines and they're shooting at all of the Sentinels, and as it goes on, you got Sentinels going around the place and people getting individual missions. You gotta go reload this, you gotta start blowing up this, and that whole sequence as just a standalone man versus machine sequence is interesting enough to watch. There's some ship piloting sequences, mostly with Niobe and Morpheus, that are interesting enough to watch, but that's about as far as I can go with positives here. Now moving on to the negatives, we'll go ahead and get the easy ones out first. Like almost every single other time that they have tried to do back-to-back sequels, save for maybe one or two franchises, the third chapter, or the secondary movie that was filmed, really does suffer because the first film always tends to have all the biggest set pieces, all the exposition, all the setup, all the story and the character development, and that secondary movie tends to be all third act shit that is stretched into a full-length movie. And this is one of the most egregious examples, to where the first hour or so of this movie you can pretty much just delete. I don't give a fuck about anything in that first hour. It literally is just like all these weird secondary ideas to pad out the runtime to a full-length film, when everything that you give a shit about, everything that actually ties in with The Matrix Reloaded in a good way, is in like the last hour and 15 minutes. So everything regarding Neo being in this little train station, this limbo area, everything with Morpheus and Trinity and Seraph going to that asshole that they're clearly making out to be like an allegory for the devil. All of that shit in the first hour. Even the stuff with the Oracle. Don't give a fuck about any of that. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just spinning its wheels for the first act and a half of this film until you finally get to all the third act stuff that was all they really had to work with this movie. Because there were so many secondary characters that were introduced in The Matrix Reloaded, they didn't get a whole lot of focus in that film, and we really focused on Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo as it should be. They kind of reversed that for this third film, and they start to give a lot more focus to those secondary characters that they introduced, like the weird kid that's obsessed with Neo, like the guy that replaced Tank, I think Link was his name, his girlfriend or wife, even some of the commander characters and the whole board of Zion, like all the elders, the ones that make all the decisions, like all of them take up the majority of the focus and the majority of the storyline, while Neo and Trinity and Morpheus all throughout the movie are like pushed off to secondary stories. Like the movie opens up, Neo's off in his little limbo world. Eventually Morpheus spends the entire back half of the film floating around on this ship with Jada Pinkett Smith. Eventually Trinity and Neo are just on a ship by themselves and just disappear for like an entire act of this movie until the final reel. And these are the characters that we came here for. We don't give a fuck about all these secondary characters. Yes, you can build up a couple of them. You can make a couple of them really cool additions. You can maybe have some of them promoted to lead or co-lead and do a good job with it. But when you have so many of these characters that you're trying to give all these little individual pieces of screen time to, and you're fucking all of the characters that we've just spent the past 2 films and years really getting attached to, what the hell were you thinking? The action sequences, namely the fight choreography, it's just dull here. That's one of the things that The Matrix is best known for, and one of the things that it made the biggest splash with its influence on filmmaking and pop culture, was that very unique style of fight choreography. Here, all the action sequences you get is some ships floating around, and you can't really get invested in it because it's the same type of sequences we've seen in the previous 2 movies, just this thing floating around shitty corridors while sentinels are floating behind it. That whole war sequence, which is the only thing that really makes this movie stand out. And then you get one fight with Neo and one of the Smiths, even though there's like millions of them. And that fight in and of itself is not that exciting. It's just 2 CGI characters floating around. It's like a really shitty early version of Superman and Zod just going at it in the skies until they go down in this little crater. The science fiction and the heady storyline and all the weird, wild concepts, it's all relegated to the first act of the film, which is basically just secondary, discarded stuff. It starts to get into all of this Christ imagery and devil imagery regarding this French guy that was in the second movie that they go to again and put a gun to his head and say, "Where's Neo? You gotta help us find him." And then you get the whole thing with Neo where he finally sacrifices himself to take out Smith, and he's laid out like the crucifix, and there's even like a light that shines out of him whenever he's dying that literally makes a cross, and it's so on the nose. And almost cliched to a point where if you're going to have this savior character, why would you make it like Jesus? Like, that's just the most easy representation that you can do that had, up to this point, religion has never really played a point in The Matrix that I have gotten a clue on. So many of these wild out there concepts either feel like they're wasted, feels like we've seen them done a million times before, or they're just so weird and out there and foreign to what is going on or what you came to The Matrix for that you just don't care about it. I'm sure somebody out there could probably make an argument for it, like the entire Matrix trilogy was some kind of a weird cyberpunk sci-fi version of the Bible, to where you got all these people that are imprisoned and asleep and he's going to lead them all to the light. I'm sure somebody could twist all of those and give me that argument and maybe make a good case for it. But up to that point, I have never once watched one single frame of a Matrix film and thought, this is like the Bible. Nor do I think that it's successful or clever or subtle in any way to do that, because it's just so on the nose with how they decide to do it in this third film, where you got the French guy in his lair that literally has like a point where they actually have hell written somewhere, and he makes a reference to hell, and he's dressed in red, and the whole thing with the cross with Neo. I mean, it's so obvious. It's like you're spoon feeding us what you're trying to say at this point, when something like this should be underneath the surface that we can kind of uncover if we feel like looking for it. Not, look at this shit, isn't it clever? The way that they decide to close out this trilogy, the way that they decide to wrap everything up, could not be more unsatisfying. And that's the reason, really, that the biggest detriment of this film, the reason why I just did not give a shit about Matrix after this, to the point where even years later, I still don't give a shit about The Matrix. I'm gonna go check this movie out tomorrow, but if the movie got canceled today, I wouldn't shed a tear, because the way that they decided to close this out, added with the plot point from the last movie that I hated, where it's like, you're actually the 6th version of Neo, and we've done this so many times before, and it doesn't matter because we're just gonna reset everything, and everything that you were told in the first movie about escaping and the one, no, you're not the one, you're number 6. In this movie, they decide that Smith is going to ultimately become the thing that needs to be stopped. Not the machines, not the thing that's going to decimate hundreds, if not thousands of people in Zion. No, just Hugo Weaving. He's gonna come back, he's continuing to assimilate all these people with his palms, sticking them in their chest to the point where he gets the Oracle, does that cheesy ass maniacal laugh. Kill off Trinity in a scene that makes no impact whatsoever. We're gonna keep Morpheus completely separate from everything that's going on, even though he should be the one that's so closely tied to Neo that even he would be a better person to give his life for what's going on, because he was willing to in the first movie, and that would come full circle. Then you have Neo just fighting one of the Smiths to the death with the help of the machines. So for 3 movies now, we've been doing this whole storyline about war against the machines are evil, the machines have imprisoned humanity, and now on a fucking dime, you're just gonna start working with these things to kill off one evil program. An evil program, by the way, that has spent the past 2 movies making presumably millions of clones of himself, to the point where it's like everybody still inside the Matrix is now Agent Smith. But when you have that final climactic battle, he says, no, all 10 billion of you just stand there and watch. I'm just gonna have a one-on-one fight with this guy. And when you start losing, you would think that all of them are like, okay, fuck what he said, we're just gonna start pummeling Neo. So that was stupid in and of itself, just from a villain standpoint. But the fact that you have Neo teaming up with the Matrix just to take out Smith as the ultimate bad guy of this trilogy now, out of nowhere, and then the machines just decide to go home. Like the middle of Zion, you have all these swarming sentinels, Neo defeats Smith, and then they just leave. And everybody's like, the war is over. No, bitch, the war's just paused, because it's not gonna be long before the machines decide, you know what? Fuck that Neo guy, we can still take these bitches. Not climactic or satisfying in any way, shape, or form. Not for Trinity as a character, not for Morpheus as a character, damn sure not for Neo as a character, and for just the whole storyline of man against machines, just to end on a, well, I'll just have a handshake agreement and we'll leave each other alone for right now. That in and of itself is just left open so that you can have another one. There's nothing finality feeling about that. Especially when the previous movie said, we've done this before, this is the 5th or 6th time, and we always just reset the Matrix and start again. That's exactly how it feels. You can do all the fucking stupid ass, oh, the little girl made a pretty sunset for Neo bullshit that you can have in the end of this movie that you want. But it still leaves you on a note where you're like, oh, so the machines are just gonna go back, rearm themselves up, and we're gonna be doing this shit again. We solved nothing. 3 films of character development and lore development and all of this storyline for fucking nothing. It just makes this movie a drag to watch. I mean, from start to finish, the whole first half of the movie is just boring, and then when you get into the stuff you actually care about, the movie just constantly gives you middle fingers saying, ha, you cared about these characters? You cared about this storyline? Well, fuck you, we're doing something different. Oh, the ones that you like? Yeah, they're off on a ship somewhere. You'll see them in about an hour. And even the moments that you get with the characters that you care about, it's stupid, it doesn't make any sense. So you have a whole subplot with Smith getting into this guy. The big plot point that they left off as a big cliffhanger in the second film, where everybody was like, what the fuck does that mean? That doesn't work as a cliffhanger if nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. You get to this movie, he's Smith. You got a human that literally talks like Smith, so I don't know why the hell anybody didn't realize it was Smith. He's got the dialect and the mannerisms and the cadence of Hugo Weaving down to a fucking T, which is credit to the actor, I will say that. But the fact that anybody was surprised that this guy was a villain is laughable. And then he has this whole scene where he tries to kill Trinity and he takes the eyes of Neo, which then just relegates Neo to wearing this shit over his face and making you feel disconnected to him for the entire movie because he feels like a shell at that point. I could rant on this movie for another hour. I do not remember disliking this movie on this level, but for some reason, by the end of this time, when I rewatched it, just everything came together. I'm like, this is why I don't give a fuck about Matrix anymore, and this is why I will only ever acknowledge the first film, because for all of the things that Reloaded does pretty well, it ultimately has to lead to this piece of shit. So all in all, guys, if you can't already tell, I am not a fan of this movie whatsoever. I don't know what kind of fucking mass hypnosis I was under the first time I watched this as a teenager and thought, you know what, this is satisfying. As an adult, I hate it. I really don't like either of these sequels, but Reloaded at least has a lot of things in it that I can watch and somewhat enjoy. This one, I will never rewatch this movie again. At least until I have to for like another review series. If this next movie's successful and there's like a 5 and a 6, fuck! So if you're a fan of The Matrix and you want to see how the original trilogy closed out, you might as well just make it up yourself. Just make up the answers for yourself and then go in and see The Matrix Resurrections, which is probably going to retcon some of this anyway, or at least deem some of it irrelevant to watch. So the fact that this is actually the conclusion they came up with to one of the greatest movies of all time in the original Matrix, I'm gonna have to give this a fuck this movie. So what do you guys think of The Matrix Revolutions? Are you somebody that likes this movie, that loves all the answers that it gives, that loves all the wrap-ups and the conclusions and all of that shit just for us to have a fourth movie? Let me know your thoughts down below on The Matrix Revolutions. And if you're not a fan of this movie, explain to me why you're not a fan of it. Is it the same exact reasons I gave, or do you have other issues with it that I did not touch on? Let me know and we will discuss it, and I'll see you guys about the same time tomorrow to talk about The Matrix Resurrection, which I hope will be a much, much, much better movie and a much more happy review than this one was. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you are a fan of The Matrix. We're going to talk about the new film tomorrow, and then later on this week, we're going to rank all 4 films in the Matrix franchise. So thank you guys for watching as always, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.